just sorting out the early details of a brand new mix. Well, I want to take a few minutes today and talk about headroom. This is inspired by a phone call I got from a colleague just last week who was so frustrated with overloading their mix bus in their DAW. And this reminded me, oh man, just how much I struggled with this in the beginning of my career. Talking about the idea of sitting down as a mix engineer and proceeding to start mixing your track, only to discover maybe 2 or 3 hours into your mix that you're totally out of mix bus. You're overloading the output of your DAW, and you haven't even got halfway through your mix yet. So what do we do as engineers when that happens? We typically try and purchase some of that headroom back. What do? We reach for all our faders and we start pulling them down. It's a rare mix that you can go into and pull all your faders down exactly the same amount and have that mix not change. You have to have a lot of forward thought into a mix like that. The way most of us mix, we've got all kinds of things going on in a mix. We've got pre-fader sends, we got post-fader sends, we got things being bussed over here and returned over there, and sometimes we put effects plugins directly on a channel, sometimes we set them up on a bus and a send. All of these different processes are what typically make up a mix. Well, if you're in the middle of all that, and you simply try and buy back some of your headroom by pulling all your faders down, even if it's by a fixed amount, I promise you, your mix fundamentally changes when you do that. There are too many variables. It's just something in my own experience I've never really successfully been able to do, is purchase back headroom without messing up my mix. So literally after years of chasing my tail in the studio, I finally decided that I have to come up with a solution for this. I have got to figure out a way to stop running out of headroom. Why? Because it's killing me. Every single mix, all of my focus and the energy that I'm putting into that mix and trying to get to the finish line is being interrupted by me having to purchase back this headroom business, right? So that evil cycle, that had to go. I had to figure out a way consistently to be able to sit down and start a mix and move all the way through that mix without ever looking back, without ever being worried about my master bus. Well, so through that process, I tried so many different experiments before finally coming up with a permanent solution. And it wasn't until I sort of borrowed from the film industry that I found that permanent solution. The first time that I ever sat in on a film being mixed, I learned something that was shocking to me. I learned that when they're mixing those films in those great big stages, there's no volume knob. There's absolutely no volume control. They've got that figured out. They've got it set at exactly the volume that a theater is in. You ever notice that about your movie collection? For the most part, those mixes are all just perfect. They just come across exactly right on your system. Well, there's a reason for that. It's because the guys that are mixing all that are following guidelines based on decibel levels and where things are set in theaters around the country. So when I witnessed one of these big film mixes going on and I realized that they're mixing into a fixed volume, that made sense to me. After that experience, I knew I had to come back to my own room and figure out a point of reference, a gain structure in my own studio that would allow me to stop messing around with this volume pot at different positions and have a fixed point of reference. Well, through a lot of experimentation and what probably took almost a month, I just kept tweaking my preamp and my monitors until I found a point of reference where I can take the dim off my monitors and I can take this knob and turn it full blast. So when I start every single mix, my master fader is at 0 and my monitor control is wide open. That means that I can't just start throwing faders up, right? I have to be very careful about how I introduce things to that mix. Now, I'm sort of an old industrial rock guy, right? When I'm trying to put together a mix that has impact, I need that mix to impact me. So this idea of starting with my monitors wide open feeds right into the way I like to put a rhythm section together. That's exactly what's going on in these long form mix sessions that I've been sharing. Every time I sit down to start a mix, the first 15 or 20 minutes of that mix, my volume pot is full blast. And because I've gone through such detailed back and forth on the levels, I know that when all of that is right, I can literally turn my monitors down and work for the rest of the day on that mix, and I will never run out of headroom. So I'm just sort of borrowing from the film industry. When I sit down to start every single mix, I'm mixing into a point of reference, a volume and a gain structure that I'm familiar with, one that impacts me in a way that I'm familiar with. And there's no question that this whole technique that I get up to has me driving my mix bus in a much more conservative way. I'm not pushing it so hard all the time. In fact, it's not unusual for me to get to the end of a mix and have 4 or 5 dB of headroom left over. Well, I would much rather underutilize my mix bus by like 4 dB than play that game I was talking about earlier, chasing your tail in the studio, where you're constantly fighting your mix bus, trying to buy back some of your headroom, only to lose it again a couple hours later and just keep playing this game. You know, as a mix engineer, it's priceless to be able to start your mix and finish it without ever looking back. That is more valuable than a couple of dB of maybe an underused mix bus or something. Be conservative on that mix bus. Allow yourself to get from the beginning of that mix to the end without having to look back, and listen to what happens to your productions. Thank you for sitting in on today's session.
Like a nightmare.